Hey everybody, welcome to the Star Wars Canon Cantina, a show where we try to answer the question, who is Luke Skywalker before the release of Star Wars Episode 9? My name is Mike. I'm broadcasting from Salt Lake Base here on planet Utah. Fall is finally, hitting planet Utah. It's kind of nice. How is it over on planet Oklahoma, Jesse?
Planet Oklahoma, it just happened. Fall happened. It was like 97 degrees, and the next day it was like 70. I don't know what happened.
Oh wow, just rolled right
yeah.
in.
Yeah, it was like this is measurable, this is measurable. Oh, it's 75. Okay. Well, there we go. So, yeah, and today with fall arriving, we got a spookier book here today, Mike. I'll mention that. There's some horror stuff in this. We'll get to it later.
That might be a reach, but I appreciate the effort you put into it. We're talking, of course, today about Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor, a book originally released in 2008, written by Matthew Stover, a guy who'd written a couple other Star Wars books. Traitor, part of the New Jedi Order series. Shatterpoint, which was, I think, a Mace Windu book that I never read, and he did the Revenge of the Sith novelization. So when we decided to do this book, I thought this came out like right before Disney acquired Lucasfilm. This thing is older than I thought it was.
Right. It is older than we both thought, but in the scheme of things, Mike, this happened during that lull we mentioned of very little Star Wars content. And, there wasn't a lot of prequel or post Return of the Jedi stuff coming out at this point onward. So kind of 2008 onward was kind of the beginning of the end for the EU. So there was only one major series after this and a few standalone books that were actually pretty good, some of them, but a few standalone books.
Slow death.
And that was it. So this seemed older than it was because it was the beginning of the end. And, we had content all the way from the end of the 80s to 2010-ish, 12-ish. So this was kind of the beginning of the end.
Yeah. So just once again, in the interest of full transparency with you, the listeners, I didn't finish this book. I kept coming up with things to distract myself. Not that it was, necessarily a bad or poorly written book. That's not the case. I just kept getting excited to do other things, which I've shared some pictures of on our social media when I'd broken out all the RPG books and stuff like that. There will be stuff coming for you all based on my distractions from this book. I'm just not quite ready to announce it yet, but keep an eye out for some more interactive stuff.
Well, I like the transparency, Mike. This book I actually read all of and did not struggle at all, like I did with Heir to the Jedi.
Well, thank God.
Which was such a relief. It was a relief to read a book about Luke that actually felt like Luke, and a book that was competently written. And I got to mention, while we're on Matthew Stover real quick, Mike, he's written some of the fan favorite EU stuff, even though he's written very few books. So there's the book Traitor, and the New Jedi Order is considered one of the better books of the entire New Jedi Orders, which is a 20-plus book series. So that's saying something. That's pretty good.
The best turd.
All right. Well, we'll move on there. I mean, it's a really great book. And then the Revenge of the Sith novelization is considered by most fans that have read all the novelizations the best novelization of all the films. And I don't know if that stands up now against the Last Jedi novelization and the Force Awakens novelizations, but prior to that, we had the episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and it was easily considered the best, and it made people appreciate prequels more and Revenge of the Sith more, which tends to be every person's favorite of the prequels. So that's only a good thing.
Once again, the best turd.
Matthew's done a lot of cool stuff, and he's a good writer too. So that's a good start. So this book was exciting for me, Mike, because it is one of the only Star Wars books I've never read. And that's kind of bizarre.
How this slipped through the cracks for you?
I remember it coming out about 2009. So you said it come out 2008. Actually came out around Christmas.
Yeah, it was like December 30th, 2008. It had been like delayed all year and just barely made 2008.
So probably was a paperback sometime in the late summer, which is when I probably would have
actually
it.
Paperback.
Yeah.
I didn't know this until looking at Wikipedia prepping for today. Paperback didn't hit until 2010.
Well, then maybe, man. Okay, so that's
So,
adding a whole
that
other
that might have
caliber
been
of
how you
things.
missed it. Is you
That
saw
is
the
how I missed
hardcover
it.
and like, well, I'll wait for paperback, and then it feels like it never came and just slipped through the cracks.
Right. And then 2010, I don't know, man. Busy time. I was finishing up college, working 2 jobs. There's some things going on. So who knows? But I'm sad I missed it. I always knew it was there. I did know it was there. And I knew it was a Matthew Stover book. And I know I'd read his other books, including the Mace Windu novel, which I remember none of now. But I did enjoy it when I read it. And I also enjoyed his take on Grievous and the novelization of Revenge of the Sith. So all good stuff. But so this was exciting for me because this seems like an EU book that I needed to read. And guess what? It focuses on Luke more than almost any other EU book. He's kind of the
Legends.
main point. Yes, Legends. So I think it was essential for me to read. So I'm glad I read it. And I think there's a lot to say about it, Mike. So we can probably jump right into that.
Yeah. All right. So before we hit the story, just a reminder: the questions that we kind of frame our discussion around for every Luke arc. First one: what state is Luke in at the beginning of the story? Second: how do the events and characters of the story impact his overall development? And since this is a legend source, our third question is: would his experiences in this story make him different than the Luke we met in Episode 8, The Last Jedi?
Ever since Luke disappeared, people have been looking for him.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
A lot of rumors, stories.
And I became a legend.
People that knew him best.
Luke.
Young Skywalker. Luke.
It's all true.
I am a Jedi. Like my father before me.
All of it.
So, Mike, this book starts a really strange way, but it works. So there's a prologue and an epilogue to this book. I'll mention that. And the prologue and epilogue do not take place at the same time as the story does. As in, there's some time after. We're led to believe a month or two, maybe more. And it is Luke being interviewed on Coruscant about what happened at Mindor. And it's kind of a way for the author to get you hooked in. And Luke is being interviewed by a reporter. So very different, right? And
Is
Luke
that-
basically, yeah.
Is that
Go ahead.
reporter badgering him about the Reapers and how he handled that situation? Which
You're gonna
trigger
say
does he
that.
pull? Does he go Paragon or Renegade?
Luke always goes Paragon.
Of course he does. I went Renegade. I always punch the reporter. That's a Mass Effect reference if you didn't know what I was talking about.
And I always go Paragon. So there you go, people. Transparency. So it's really interesting because they're dancing around the subject of Mindor. And the guy says, I want to get the facts right, make sense of them, make a case. And Luke says, what sort of case? And the guy says, like, an accurate depiction. And Luke says, that's great. The case is war crimes, crimes against civilization, dereliction of duty, desertion, that kind of thing. Anything you can find out. And the guy's like, about who's the war criminal you want to indict? And Luke said, I thought it was obvious. It's me. So that's how the book starts. Basically, Luke coming to this guy and saying, the guy's saying, hey, you're the hero of Mindor, right? And Luke says, no, I'm a war criminal and I killed thousands of people. And that's the hook to the book starts.
Does he use the words war criminal? I don't remember.
Yeah, that was a direct quote I just read. So he says war crimes, crimes against civilization, dereliction of duty, desertion, that kind of thing. And the guy is really perplexed, especially because this guy's coming to Luke basically saying, we want the rights for the new Luke Skywalker story, because apparently at this point in Star Wars history, in Legends, there has been holodramas of Luke's exploits, Luke Skywalker, the legend, which I think is really interesting to our discussion on the show, especially with reference to the sequels and Last Jedi and things like that. There's even a holodrama called Revenge of the Jedi that talks about Luke not murdering, but just defeating and killing Palpatine and Vader simultaneously. And that's what the whole galaxy's been fed.
And season 4 of this holodrama is all about this reporter going around trying to get signatures for the rights for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an Arrested Development joke.
That's really, But you're right. I mean, it's so interesting. So this is kind of showing Luke telling a really honest story, and this guy's trying to twist the story. So then we jump right into the story, and it's actually the story of what happened to our characters. But
so we actually have two answers to our first question then, because at the beginning of the book of the story, he's regretful. He's like, "Hey, I'm a war criminal," but this is all actually the
transparent truth.
Well, it's the whole you open a book, then the 3 weeks earlier kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So when we jump to where the story actually begins, Luke is fresh off of their misadventures with the Searook and the stuff happening in the book Truce at Bakura, right?
Definitely. And what's really cool is this takes place not long at all after where we picked up in Bakura. So it's really exciting for you guys at home listening to this. We're following the timeline to the T we can. And it starts off with the guys in Rogue Squadron with Wedge and Hobby and all Luke's friends. And they're basically in their X-Wings, and they come across the situation of Mindor. And this is kind of where we're introduced to the conflict and what's going on with Mindor. We're also introduced to Lando has really settled into his position as being a general, and not only a general now, but actually a Starfleet general, as in he has his own Mon Cal ship. So that's pretty neat as well. Lando's kind of doing command.
Excuse me. I like the new version of Lando so much more. I think it's just
What's the new version of Lando? What's the new version of Lando? Do we have much?
It basically, without taking too much of a diversion, it leans into the businessman entrepreneur. He becomes a droid impresario. He's in the droid business.
Okay, well, there you go. So the first time we see Luke is actually with Han and Leia, and they're, of course, with Lando and all this stuff. But this book has a strong focus on the Falcon and the trio, which I really like. And I wrote down an interesting thing here. One of the first things we see with Luke is Han says, "You got to go with the flow, man. You just trust in the Force, right? Wouldn't the Force have brought you to this chance if you weren't supposed to take it?" And they're talking about Luke going on this mission to Mindor because Luke is very apprehensive about the events of Bakura. He doesn't want to get involved in any more conflicts. He doesn't want to fight, which is really the Luke we see. And Luke says, "I don't know." And then Han says, "Just ask Kenobi himself the next time he shows up with that Force thing of his, that ghost thing." And Luke says, "He's not a ghost." And Han says, "Whatever." And Luke says, this is kind of interesting. He doesn't really come around anymore. It's actually been weeks since I've last seen him. Like he's drifting away too far to make contact. And Leia says, "Well, maybe that means something, Luke." So that's kind of like right where Luke is established right at the beginning is Luke's kind of doubting Ben's even not coming around anymore. What does that mean for me? I really am the Last Jedi, and what are my responsibilities? Which is interesting, Mike, because we saw Kenobi come around in Bakura, right? And kind of just
to Leia, though, right?
That was Anakin, actually.
Oh, that is
Kenobi came to Luke.
That's right. Yeah.
Kenobi came to Luke and was like, "No, you have to go to Bakura."
Yeah.
But what I really like in these books so far, Mike, is consistent. Is Luke does not want to fight. Luke does not want to be a commander or general. But he's kind of thrust into these things by circumstance because he's been given this kind of responsibility in a way. So, and there's some Yoda quotes in this book too, where Luke's thinking about it, which is also really great. But they say you're in, and Luke says, "I guess I am." They finally go.
And this mission or situation on Mindor that they're investigating. There have been basically terrorist acts against the New Republic. That were
the newly established republic.
The newly established republic that were carried out by some shadow stormtroopers, and there's like terrorism and like piracy and slaughter. And they find out, and I don't remember how they do this, but this is like the center of this base of operations is on Mindor.
Definitely. They don't know much about Mindor. It's kind of an unassuming planet. And Luke is now once again a general with Lando, and he's leading this task force to Mindor. And Luke has his own Mon Cal cruiser. So Lando's not actually sent on the mission. He's just with the fleet, even though he's in his own ship. And Luke, Han, and Leia, and they all go to Mindor.
It would be difficult to send the entire fleet to Mindor, though, because the planet itself might be unassuming, but the solar geography, I guess, whatever you want to call that, around it is unique because Mindor itself is surrounded by the remains of another planet that was destroyed in another Empire weapons test, basically. And the debris hasn't settled into a gravitic orbit or anything yet, so it's a difficult path to get to Mindor, and you can't just jump a bunch of big ships out there. It's almost like the Alderaan field.
In fact, they reference that. Luke references that when he gets there, and so Luke arrives with his Mon Cal cruiser, full on Rebel battleship,
The MC-80, I think, and it's called the Justice.
Yeah,
Luke
so the
Skywalker
MC-80,
and the Justice.
just like Home 1, the MC-80, Home 1 class, and they get there and there's problems. So what happens is Mindor has more opposition than they've ever realized. Thousands, like 1,000 TIE fighters come out of the hangar bays on Mindor. And also Luke is not aware of the gravity situation with the asteroids and the gravity wells on Mindor. And here's what happens, Mike. The Mon Cal cruiser is severed in half and starts heading towards the planet and breaking up in the atmosphere.
Well, and
so
it's
Luke is on the
blown up-
ship.
It's blown up by one of these gravity weapon like bombs,
Right.
that destroyed this other planet that created this whole space terrain situation. The Big Crush is what it's referred to as.
And they've never seen this sort of tech before. Luke hasn't, at least. And most of the fighters die, and the ship, half of it blows up in space. So half of the Mon Cal crew just dies in space, and then half of the ship lands towards the planet. Now I got to mention, obviously Matthew is a prequel fan if he wrote a book, but especially a book where he wrote about Anakin and Obi-Wan. So Luke ends up doing his best to land the half of the Mon Cal cruiser on the planet, exactly like Anakin does at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith with Grievous's half of his ship. But Luke does a worse job than Anakin. So a lot worse job. But it's obviously an interesting callback, and we can obviously see the parallels because the author wrote the Revenge of the Sith book. Most of the men die when they crash land on the planet. Luke is the only sole survivor, which is
Good
kind
job,
of the
Luke.
beginning. The beginning of the end for Luke, with his regret, doubt, and fears on this whole story. Luke is already feeling, he felt all their deaths in the Force, right? And he's already feeling like he's failed. And Han and Leia are not here yet. I mentioned they decided to go on the mission, but they have not arrived yet. And Leia feels in the Force that Luke is in trouble. And she tells Han, go get Luke. I don't know what's going on, but go get him. Which is kind of the start of the Han Leia arc. So
who is in charge of this group of an Imperial, splinter faction or whatever? What's his name? Darth Pun or something like that?
Darth Pun. Lord Shadow Spawn.
Shadow-
Apparently is his name.
Yeah, Shadow Spawn. That's it. And I is it Shadow Spawn or Shadow's Pawn?
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's-
Darth
yeah.
Pun. That's a really bad villain.
He goes
name.
by Shadow Spawn, actually. But we don't know much about him. They just know he's an Imperial warlord. They come to this planet, and he actually hails them. I didn't mention that before the ensuing gravity well incident. And he hails the fleet before he destroys them, and he announces who he is. But that's about it.
I'm
but
Shadow's Pawn.
Here's one of the first lines from Shadow Spawn. He's talking with his troops. He says, "We will eventually lose this battle, but we must. Losing this battle is how we will deliver the Empire to its rightful ruler, Emperor Skywalker." So once again, another weird hook at the beginning of the story. But apparently these are not regular Imperials. They're some sort of zealots cult in a way. The Shadow Troopers and Shadow Spawn. And not only do they have resources, they have gravity wells and thousands of TIE fighters, but they actually
TIE
want to make,
Defenders as well.
yes, they want to make Luke Skywalker their emperor, which is really strange. Mike, what does that mean? We don't know at this point in the story. You're right. A lot of TIE Defenders, which is a canonical TIE fighter because it was in Star Wars Rebels. But obviously something they pulled from the Legends source material. And that is a very highly advanced TIE fighter.
Heavy
with
shields,
and
heavy
everything.
guns, all that stuff.
All the good stuff. It's a lot faster than an X-Wing. All the good stuff. So Luke is stranded on this planet, and this is sort of a strange planet. Its main features are lava, rock, and the planet is constantly breaking up and emitting lava and things like that all over the planet. So it's a hostile environment for Luke as well. And something strange happens when Luke crashes on the planet with the Mon Cal cruiser. All of his men die, and they're encased in lava. It's very dark right off the bat. So, and they're basically turned to stone. So, Luke's dealing with all that. Not only did they die in the crash, but they then were encased in lava. So, another dark beginning to this story.
Grim.
Okay, I got a quote here about Luke and his regrets with this stuff. He'd made wrong choices every day in his life. In his mind's eye floated everyone who had died because of him, everyone who had been hurt, from Mindor to Endor, back to Yavin, back to the
This
corpses
book is
that had
all
lain.
about rhymes and puns.
I know. You love it, Mike. I thought I got my happy ending. I thought I did. I mean, I didn't do everything you asked me to, Master Yoda. You want me to break the rule of the Sith. Now they're gone. Ben, you asked me to destroy Vader. I did that. Father, even you, Father, you told me that together we would throw down the Emperor, and we did. Now it's over. But it's not the end. It seems it's never the end. So this is sort of Luke's internal thoughts. These are not actual dialogue. But this is kind of Luke just really struggling. This was him looking at all these corpses and things. Yeah, it's pretty. He starts getting pretty dark, though.
Well, so that's dark, and then this is where I approximately where I finished. Aren't we soon introduced to a new substance, Melt Massive, and Lord Shadowpun's methods? Or am I totally wrong?
No, it's closer to here. Yeah. Do you want to read those, Mike? Do you have?
No, I don't even know where my book is right now.
Well, Mike, that's actually a good point. I'll mention what happens next. So Luke is actually captured almost immediately by legions of the Shadow Troopers, which are just stormtroopers in black armor, very similar to the Death Troopers, I would say, we see in Rogue One. They're essentially elite stormtroopers in black armor. And Luke actually surrenders willingly to them. He says, no one else needs to die because of me. He's feeling this regret from all these men that died on his ship. And that little dialogue I mentioned in his head. And he willingly gives himself over to Lord Shadowspawn's men. They take them back to the base. And there's this guy on a throne, an obsidian throne, wearing a strange crescent moon hat. It looks kind of like the advisors to the Emperor, what they used to wear, if you remember those guys. Except it's all black. He's wearing black robes, and he has this strange actual sword, not a lightsaber, but a physical sword. And he challenges Luke to a duel, and Luke says, I refuse to fight you. It's not the Jedi way. I don't want to hurt you.
If you search for the cover art for the book, the back cover has sort of a picture of this guy with his actual swords and his dumb looking hat.
Very dumb looking hat. And Luke says, the stormtroopers say, tell this to Lord Shadowspawn. He says, I plan to. That's why I'm here. So Luke's like, take me right to him. And so this guy challenges Luke to a battle by the throne, and Luke's lightsaber. Luke refuses to fight him, and the guy activates his sword, and it's almost like a vibro knife or something we've seen in Star Wars, where the energy emits on the blade itself.
Sort of like Snoke's Praetorian Guard in Episode 8.
Definitely. And Luke ends up having to fight this guy because he approaches him, and Luke notices this guy does not know how to hold a blade at all. He says, he even makes a note that says this guy hasn't even watched people sword fight, essentially. And Luke defeats this guy easily, but he tells the guy, I do not want to hurt you. Please don't come at me. I don't want to end your life. So Luke ends up actually punching the guy in the face and knocking this guy's weird hat off at the same time without killing the guy. And as the hat comes off, this is kind of our strange detail here. The hat actually pulls part of the guy's scalp off and a lot of blood. And the guy kind of seems like he's just come out of a daze. And he's completely different voice, everything. And basically, Luke realizes that the guy was under some sort of influence via this strange hat. And at the next moment, before Luke can figure out how to save the guy, because the guy's like, please save me. The guy says, please kill me. Just end this. And Luke's like, I won't. And
it's a dumb hat, but it's not worth dying over.
And the guy basically tells Luke really quick that he's under control of a powerful guy, a powerful entity. And Luke says, does he want to kill me? And he says he won't. That's what I've been trying to tell you. He doesn't want to kill you. He wants to be you. And before Luke could figure out what this means, a burst of blue energy blasts up Luke's legs and ripped away his consciousness. So Luke is, we don't know what happens to him, but he's knocked out. He's encased in this sort of, I'll call it energy stone. That's what happens next. So Luke is basically putting the pieces together that Shadow Spawn was not the guy he just faced. Shadow Spawn, that was just some clumsy guy who never held a sword in his life. And when Luke knocked the helmet off of him, Luke kind of put all this together. At this point, Han and Leia, like we do in Han and Leia fashion and Chewbacca, come to save Luke, and they get in trouble coming down the planet. They actually encounter a lot of the gravity wells. The Falcon crashes. They get boarded by pirates. They don't know the story of these pirates.
Check. Yeah, sounds like a standard week for the Falcon. Yep.
Yes. And they are kind of double-crossed by these sort of pirates that they thought were going to help them because they thought they were against... They said that we're against Lord Shadowspawn as well and these Imperials. And Han gets played by a woman called Aona.
Check.
Yeah, who's a beautiful redheaded woman. That's what the book tells us several times. And Leia's jealous, as in Han is somewhat confused by her. And they get double-crossed on their way to see Luke. Check.
Yep.
So
it fits. Pass it on.
next scene we have is Luke waking in darkness, literally in a cave. He's literally encased in some sort of mineral, which we're not familiar with, which is what Mike mentioned earlier, the
Melt Massif.
And he is surrounded by thousands of other individuals who are not moving or anything and are also encased in this. But Luke, being a Jedi, he has some form of consciousness and can get out of the situation, Mike, of course. It's like you would imagine.
So, at this point,
he can't move either.
Well,
he can't move.
Is Lord Shadowpun essentially acting like Khan, planting those, earworms in the Enterprise crew that, was making them act the way he wanted to?
Kind of, yeah.
Because that's kind of what we're describing. So, like you mentioned earlier, some sci-fi horror elements. That's the first thing I thought of.
Definitely. And Luke's kind of put all this together.
And then the second thing I thought of was the scene in Aliens, the Queen's lair with all the dead humans on the side. But that's a little more morbid. She was never interested in controlling the humans.
No. But the Queen's aliens, yes. No, definitely. And Luke's realizing that something along the lines of these people that are down below the caverns with him, Shadowspawn's basically channeling himself or something through them, and they're appearing on the surface as these people with these hats on, using their life force, very similar to the Sea-Rook, maybe?
He hasn't figured out a delivery method as effective as the ear tunneling insect, so instead he has to resort to a dumb hat.
Yeah, and use people's bodies. Yeah. Dumb hat. Now, at this point, we're introduced to Chronal. And like, as Mike was saying, we had a discussion before we started the show. He's like, is Chronal dumb or is Chronal actually cool? And I was like, because the summary sounds really dumb, and that's what the show's going to sound, because there's really no good way to explain it because we're actually given a scene, several scenes in this book, but this is the first scene of many from Chronal's point of view. And Chronal is actual Shadow Spawn's real self. Shadow Spawn is just a moniker he uses for the people he controls. As Mike said, Shadow's pawns. And
Lord Shadowpun.
Chronal, I mean, Mike, you want to give a quick summary on his backstory?
Yeah.
Now you know that.
He was, well, I didn't know that until we started like prepping for this. It was one of the Emperor's hand, one of his like select group of elite agents, and then went on to become, one of his advisors. And at one point he got the title Prophet of the Dark Side when he was working for the Emperor. So a not insignificant,
not a Sith
powerful
Lord.
dude.
Right. So this is a thing common in the Legends EU stuff, but those guys you see with Palpatine and maybe even the guys you see with Snoke in The Last Jedi, we're not sure yet, but these are not just politicians necessarily. Some of these guys are force sensitive or they are manipulated and trained by Palpatine in different ways. They're not the Sith Lord's apprentice, right? Like Vader or Kylo are, but they are agents of the dark side. They help Palpatine get things done. They manipulate people. They do things like that. They use the Force to manipulate people, things like that. So they're not Sith warriors, Sith lords.
They're agents of the dark side.
So here's a quote from Chronal that kind of summarizes his essence.
This
is actually a really good quote.
Guy.
This is a really good quote. Because I was telling Mike, Chronal doesn't actually use the dark side or the light side. Everything to him is life or death. The dark is the way he sees things. He basically sees the universe as very Thanos-esque. Just the universe needs to be purged, and it will be purged one day. The universe will have a heat death, and he will be there to see it.
If you are one of the people who believes Thanos was right, by the way, you should probably just go ahead and turn this off.
Here's a quote. Only power is real, and the only real power is the power to destroy. Existence is fleeting. Destruction is eternal. So this is kind of this guy's mindset, which, very Reaper-esque, Mike, to bring it back to Mass Effect.
Oh, nice. I like that.
Because that is the Reaper motto right there. The only thing eternal is destruction and the eventual destruction. So he thinks
the Reapers had a much more efficient model than Thanos. Thanos is just like one time, boom, half of everybody gone. Reapers are like, no, small bit every 50,000 years we come back and call the galaxy. I need to.
We will have our Mass Effect episode one day.
This sounds like the beginning of a neat PowerPoint presentation about the most effective way to population control the galaxy.
So this guy's goal is not as Sith Lord, not a imperial leader, like it seems, even though these are tools he's using. His goal is eventually to rule the galaxy in Luke Skywalker's body. So what we've come to find out now is that his end game is he's harvesting all these people's energy and life and all this stuff. We've seen them in the caverns. But his ultimate goal is to eventually transfer himself to Luke's body, show the galaxy visually, look at Luke Skywalker, and become the new emperor of the galaxy in the face of Luke Skywalker, because there's already legends about Luke Skywalker, right? And he thinks through Luke's body, he would have more charisma, but also more force powers, right? And that's his end game goal. And this guy is not even, Mike, he's not even somewhere where people can see him. He's literally under the ground, kind of like Luke is. Like he's, right? All this is through his mind. He's controlling all these things, all these moving parts.
So this guy's like, oh man, Luke is way better looking than I am. I'll definitely get more people on my side if I'm on camera looking like him.
Yeah, he's like, I will be Emperor Skywalker. And that's what all his troops are obsessed with, is the eventual rise and rule of Emperor Skywalker. So what's really interesting, I haven't mentioned yet, but all the Imperials in this book revere Luke, because they're like, you're the prophet, you're the leader that was foretold. Because Shadow Spawn's basically been, just poisoning all their minds because he's controlling all of them, right? With the idea that Luke is going to come and become their leader.
To put like the post-it note version of this, Chronal is a former agent of the Emperor who is acting as Shadow Spawn, his like persona,
Guys.
moniker, guys, whatever, who is using this stuff called Melt Massive to mind control a lot of people, and he wants to take over Luke's body.
Right.
I
And
can
this
fit-
melt massive is kind of a way to channel the force. I didn't mention that yet, but that makes more. It's not. This isn't like a sci-fi.
it's not
parasitic
something
thing.
that anybody could do. It's just
No.
the medium through which he's using the force to control these people. So pretty evil sounding stuff.
Yeah. And something I got to mention about Chronol is, once again, he isn't referred to as the Force or the dark side or anything like that. He just refers to it as the dark, the existence of the dark. Everything is the dark. And that comes into play later with Luke experiencing this. Luke being in this cavern under his control, Luke starts kind of losing his mind a little bit. And there's this guy named Nick who is down there who breaks out and breaks Luke out, basically. I'm going to give the quick summary of it. And they escape together. And Luke is still having these bouts of experiencing the dark side, the dark in his mind, even though they've broken free from this sort of melt massive material that helps Chronal channel energy through them, that sort of thing. So, but this character, Nick, saves Luke. And apparently Nick is a guy who's a veteran of the Clone Wars. He was a Republic officer. And he's literally been... he basically pieced out when Vader came around. Said, I want nothing to do with this version of the Republic, which is now the Empire, right? And shortly after that, Shadow Spawn, obviously a couple years later, not much longer, after he was hiding from Vader and stuff, captured Nick and did this sort of thing to him. So Nick was actually one of Shadow Spawn's first victims.
Yeah, I was quite confused when because obviously I didn't get this far in the book, but this character Nick Rostu, it basically like what you described was correct, but this guy's first appearances were in another Star Wars book written by Matthew Stover. So Stover kind of he Filoni'd this character. He pulled a character of his own creation that wasn't super necessary and put him in this new situation, which, I mean, it's less egregious because it's, in books and stuff, and I guess it somehow makes sense. But I was like, why is this guy like important? He's from a prequel era book.
Yeah, and just I feel like as a generic character, I mean, I guess he knows the character, so he wrote him. And it's kind of interesting. The guy has been under Shadow Spawn's control for years, right?
Yeah. But his name is Nick, and you're not even going to spell
it
like it's Star Wars. Like,
I know
Luke is the only person allowed to have a regular spelled Earth name in Star Wars.
But Luke and Nick have some really interesting interactions. Nick's kind of just a regular guy, but he has reverence for the Jedi in a way because he was a Republic officer. He actually never knew Anakin Skywalker, but apparently this is a theme going through the book, right? About the stories of legends and the stories about characters. The guy's like, oh man, Luke's like, wait, you knew my father? And he's like, well, I didn't really know him, but everyone knew what he was doing through the Clone Wars, like at all times.
Everyone knew about him and Senator Amidala. We all just talked about it just off camera.
He basically tells Luke about how everyone knew of Anakin's victories and Anakin's battle tactics and all these things, and it was very inspiring throughout the Republic. And this is an interesting thing for Luke to hear because Luke basically tells the guy, that's not what I heard. So Luke's thinking more along the lines of Vader, you know what I mean? And this guy's saying, no, Anakin was a great guy. And Luke's saying, well, Vader. And it's really interesting. It's an interesting tie between the prequels and the post-Return of the Jedi legend stuff, because Luke's actually hearing this for the first time, that Anakin was a great tactician, a legend, and maybe Anakin was even more of a legend than he even was in real life, right? To Luke. The same thing how Luke has these HoloNet dramas about him now, right? Anakin was the same way, and they're kind of paralleling that to Luke. And Luke's kind of feeling that. Interesting. So, a lot of stuff happens to Han and Leia. They get trapped in these caverns below, and they are in trouble. And as this is going on, the Republic squadrons in space are getting shredded by the TIE fighters and the gravity wells. even though they're way better at combat. We have Rogue Squadron, we have Blue Squadron, we have Green Squadron, we have all these. We have these new Corvettes, which have been outfitted by the New Republic to be really strong in combat. These Corvette cruisers, they're still losing because essentially Shadow Spawn's TIE fighters are just kamikazing them. I mean, they're really not even fighting typical dogfighting, right? Like they're just kind of kamikazing in.
Literal kamikazing, yeah.
So they're losing, and at this point, we bring Lando back into the story. Lando hears Luke's in trouble. Lando hears Han and Leia are in trouble, and Lando hears Rogue Squadron's in trouble. What does Lando do, Mike?
He forms a band called Lando and the Mandos, and they go on tour throughout. But he does go to the Mandalorians, and gets some of them to help out in the situation. And I think another character that was created by Stover, or at least used earlier, I could be wrong about that, but Fen Shisha.
Another Mando name, Fen?
Yeah. Fen Rao, who is canon, so that may be where they pulled it from. But yeah, Lando and a bunch of Mandalorian ships show up, and they take a different approach to the planet.
With Lando's Mon Cal cruiser.
Yeah.
And this wasn't like Lando's like, I'm going to go to the Mandos. It was like Lando was already having a meeting with the Mandalorians, basically like the Bakura situation. He was having a meeting with the Mandalorians to settle a dispute with the Imperials and the Mandalorians, and the Mandalorians wanted the Republic's help, and then they found out they couldn't basically come to an agreement. And Lando said, you know what? I don't care. Forget about that. You guys give all your money to the Imperials, whatever. And they're like, really? He's like, but I got this mission right now where I could use some really elite ground troops. And they're like, what? And he's like, I have money. And they're like, okay. So Lando gets inventive where he's like, I'm going to save Wedge. I'm going to save Luke. And so he just goes, even without really permission of the main Rebel fleet, takes this Mon Cal cruiser, some fighter squadrons, and the Mandos and ground transports to go to the planet to rescue his friends. And they encounter the same situation in space that everybody's been encountering, which is a huge problem. But the Mandos do get on the ground and start trying to disable the gravity well guns.
Yeah, without going into the nitty gritty of it, they basically approach from the dark side of the planet, keeping the planet between them and the sun, where there's a bunch of other crap happening in space with all these gravity wells and stuff.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the Mandos get down on the surface, but Lando's still dealing with all this junk in space, basically, and it's getting pretty dire. So Luke rescues a lot of people from Shadow Spawn's influence. Luke starts cutting off the helmets, these funky hats of these characters, these people, and trying to save them. And what's really sad is when it happens, Shadow Spawn just pulls their life force out of them. Luke thought he could save them like he did Nick and some of these other characters, but Shadow Spawn's kind of onto his game, Chronal. I'll correct myself. And Luke starts feeling the pang of all these deaths, even though he tried to save these people. This whole story, Mike, Luke doesn't really raise his lightsaber to anybody. He only defends himself, and he actually kills very few people, but several people die because of him, right? I mean, more than several. A lot.
Tens of thousands, right? Or right. At least that's what he feels guilty for.
So Lando and his men in space are in a dire situation. Think of this at that point in the movie. The Mandos are pinned down. They're losing on the surface to the thousands of stormtroopers. Lando and Rogue Squadron in space can't handle it anymore. They're actually as you said, Mike, the grav bombs are being aimed at them and about to fire at them. Luke does reunite with Han and Leia, but Leia has been captured by Chronal. Chronal finds out that Luke has a sister through reaching out, feeling her through the Force, and says, you know what? I don't need Skywalker. I can take Skywalker's sister. This would be even better because she's the face of the New Republic. And so he actually takes her, and Han and Luke are freaking out, to say the least. Han and Luke do get the Falcon back from the pirates, and they end up joining forces with the pirates because they realize they have an end game of defeating these Imperials. And what's really interesting, Mike, about these pirates earlier is Aona, the sassy and beautiful redhead from earlier, actually ends up being Nick's love interest, Nick's girlfriend, she's been looking for him for over a year or two, and she traced him to Mindor, and her and Nick reunite, which is cool. And Han's like, see, everything's fine, but Lando is in space, and literally his Mon Cal is about to be destroyed. And I've got a quote here written by Lando.
This would be, if Luke is red text, Yoda is green text, Lando gets gold text.
Gold and purple text or something. So Lando has a little mini paragraph about Luke here, which I think is really interesting. They outplanned us, suckered us in, and we went in head first because we thought we were invincible. We thought the good guys always win. We don't. Of all of them, Luke was the only one who ever suffered under that delusion. Well, not never. Han had told him once that something in Luke had changed after Bespin. Somehow Luke understood in a way that Lando never had, that Han, Leia, and Chewbacca had simply never grasped just how dark a place the universe really is. So this is Lando thinking about how Luke is the only one who's kind of learned the hard truths that good guys don't always win and good guys don't always triumph. And Lando's like, man, I wish I would have learned that earlier because we're all doing this. Lando guessed that's where Luke got his humility, his kindness, his gentle faith that people could change for the better. That must have been why he really smiled, almost never even made jokes, because that goodness was all that he really had. It was his lifetime, the rope which he clung, dangling above the abyss. And we all just clung to him, Lando thought. He was our hope. As long as Luke Skywalker's alive, we always figured somehow everything would turn out okay. And that's why the Republic was losing today. So here's what happened. Right before this, Shadow Spawn's troops made an announcement that Luke Skywalker was dead, that he was killed, because they saw the Falcon go down. And this is essentially them all saying, like we've said, Mike, with The Last Jedi and things like that, I was Luke Skywalker, the legend. I was Luke Skywalker. Like, you know what I mean? Like the focus of everybody, like the hope of everybody, including the entire New Republic. And Lando's kind of saying, well, I guess that's it. If Luke's the only one, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course, Luke interrupts Lando's mid-death musing sort of thing. And Han and Leia even think they're going to die too. And Luke says, this is Skywalker. All Republic ships disengage and withdraw. All Imperial forces hereby promoted to Air Marshal. Says, you're now in command. You all order deactivation of subjamming space, power down all gravity stations, and execute unconditional surrender with all available speed. When surrender is complete, you will assist in the evacuation of all non-combatants. So what happens is, you remember, Mike, earlier, everyone on the Imperial side wants Luke to be the Emperor, right? And they take his orders as gospel. And Luke finally gets to a transmission after learning this information from Shadow Spawn, all the stuff, and basically tells all the Imperials to stand down, all the Republic to retreat. He says, just leave me. And all the Imperials help escort the civilians. So what I didn't mention yet, Mike, but these thousands of people that Shadow Spawn's using are civilians and slaves. So now the Imperials, these Shadow Troopers, these Shadow Stormtroopers and stuff, start freeing all the slaves, freeing all the civilians, and trying to get them off the planet. And they also deactivate the gravity wells. Very convenient, but good. Because Luke kind of uses that authority of, hey, I'm the Emperor Skywalker, right?
Yeah.
That you guys all wanted. And they've been brainwashed via Shadow Spawn to only take orders from Shadow Spawn and Shadow Spawn when he's in Luke's body. So Luke uses this manipulation for good, basically, and saves a lot of lives for a short period, but he does. So.
Yeah, he saves them for now.
I mean, people do escape. I'll mention that.
Yeah. There are some survivors that make it up to the.
Well, this is an unwinnable situation. We haven't mentioned this yet, but this is an unwinnable situation. Shadow Spawn essentially has a end game where all these gravity wells will just destroy the planet, destroy everything around the planet, create some sort of, as you would say, Mike. I mean, this is more of the sciencey bits of the book, but like a chain reaction with the planets and stars exploding, and you get what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I mean, just nothing is going to make it out. Nothing.
Yeah.
Like Chronal's even, he's like, if I don't get to win, like this is what's going to happen. Very evil, right? Because to Chronal, it's all just like, well, the universe is going to end, and I want it all to end. So towards the end of the book, Chronal, what I'm going to call, ascends to his final form, Frieza style. and he's in the body of a really strong humanoid man.
So we've had Mass Effect, Arrested Development, and now Dragon Ball Z. We are just all over media with our
All over.
references today.
And he fights this guy. This is not much of a fight. This is not a lightsaber fight. This is essentially Luke realizing that this last guy is not actually Chronal's body, but it's the final body of another person. And Luke does not want to fight this guy. And this is a giant humanoid man, I guess. He's massive. I don't know if he's quite a man, but he's way bigger than Luke. I mean, way bigger than Luke. Luke even says his biceps are the size of my head, to give you a description of how big the guy
Luke's
is.
fought bigger. Rancor's bigger than that. That's all I'm saying.
That's true. That's true. But this Rancor's not being controlled by some quasi Sith Lord.
Fair.
You know? But Luke refuses to fight the guy, hurt the guy. Leia at this point, Luke gets her back, but she's completely controlled and in the dark realm, or whatever you want to call this. It's not called the dark realm in the book, but it's like where you're stuck in the dark. You're stuck in this very netherworld of the Force-esque. You're not coming back to your body, where Shadow Spawn. And Leia's convulsing on the Falcon, and Han's thinking like this is the end, like we're gonna die from all the gravity in the planet. And he's like, Leia's dying in my arms, right? And Luke fights this guy, and unfortunately has to kill this guy. This guy even almost kills Luke, and Luke kills him and feels a huge sense of regret, realizes this wasn't actually Chronal's body, and is very upset about that. And the second Luke fights and kills this guy, all the stormtroopers, everything on the planet that's under Shadow Spawn's control starts convulsing and dying. So Luke's like, I don't want this to happen to Leia. And meanwhile, all this is happening. We have Han doing some fancy flying, trying to get off the planet as it's imploding. Lando in the same situation, like we mentioned earlier. Same with the Rogue Squadron. All the men and women that Shadow Spawn was under the control of, all the slaves and civilians are dying, dead, because Luke severed this final link, right? Like Chronal's final form, basically, to the original man. And what Luke does is the way Luke defeats this guy is through the Force. He doesn't actually hurt this guy, but he reaches into this guy's mind, finds Chronal, and basically severs the link and comes after Chronal through the netherworld of the Force, or whatever you want to call it. And that's actually what triggers this event when I'm talking about everyone dying. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like Luke going into the Force, finding this guy in the dark. Luke even sees Leia's life force or whatever it is. And Leia's a light in the dark. Luke's a light in the dark. And Luke finds him, severs this, tries to kill this guy, and ends up killing everyone. Which is really dark.
Yeah.
Now, here's how the book ends. The Falcon gets out. Lando gets out. But Luke and R2 don't get out. Everyone's really confident they didn't make it out. And one of the last couple pages of the book, Mike, what I think is really interesting, I haven't mentioned this yet in the book, but there's one or two paragraphs in the book that was from R2's perspective, which I'm not used to, which is cool. And one of the last couple pages of the book is before the epilogue is all from R2. After the planet's about to explode and all this stuff, and R2 has hoisted himself on an asteroid and is clinging to it where it's facing the dark side of the planet. So R2 knows approximately he has about 3 hours to live. Mm-hmm. And R2 is contemplating his life, which is really interesting. Very mathematically, but also some pangs of emotion and quirkiness as the R2 we know. And he labels his friend C-3PO and his master Luke Skywalker and his regret. Now I know he's got to spend time with them again, which is really interesting. And Luke is actually in his X-Wing, clinging on to his dear life, barely. And R2 gets in the X-Wing, and they make it out of there. Now, what's interesting about this, and Chronal has not been killed, Mike. He was severed, and we don't know where he goes. Luke's fairly confident that he's been killed, but he's not sure. And Chronal essentially escapes, but Chronal has no influence, no bodies, no nothing to control anymore. And the final chapter of the book is called Debriefing. It's an epilogue. And it's essentially Luke following up with this reporter again. The reporter coming back, hey man, you told me the story. Here's the story now in story form. The legend of Luke Skywalker and the Battle of Mindor. And Luke's like, this was no battle. This was a massacre. I can't, like, all these people died because of me. And I see you put a bit in here where I sword fight Chronal's final form with a lightsaber and I cut off limbs. He's like, why do you guys always add that? I also see that you added this redheaded woman as my love interest. I have no interest in redheaded women. And he goes, and besides, she was with Nick. You know what I mean? The pirate lady. He's like, so that's inaccurate. And he says, you guys add all these bits where I'm fighting stormtroopers and killing people, and I bring down a Star Destroyer with my hands and all this stuff. And the guy's like, well, man, you got to make the holodramas good. And Luke says, what do you mean the holodramas? He goes, I sold the rights to a holodrama for this because they were going to pay me 10 times what you were going to pay me for the story. And Luke said, man, listen, I was just trying to get the story straight because I like want the world to know that I'm no hero. I'm no legend. And the guy says, even if I stretch bits, you're still a legend. You're still a hero. And Luke says, no, here's the deal, man. When I severed Chronal's link, I knew I was severing all those people's lives, and I still did it.
Dark.
And the book ends like that. Like, and he's saying, I'm no hero. And the guy says, no, you're a hero. You're a light in the darkness. You lead and you always do what's best. And that was best for that situation, to save yourself and your friends and to keep the Republic alive. And Luke says, I still don't think I'm a hero. And that was right. That's how the book ends.
Well, to pop that back into our question. So how do the events and characters of this story impact his development? The events, based on how this book is framed, are, it sounds like, largely exaggerated, and we don't actually know the quote unquote true story of what actually happened because we were reading the story of it, basically, that gets
right.
Sent through this holodrama. But obviously the biggest...
This is from Luke's point of view, though. Like, this was like half holodrama, half actually what Luke experienced, I would say. I'd say even more actually what Luke experienced with some of the holodrama, right? But you're right. This is like a weird thing they haven't really done much in the Star Wars books where they're like, you just read a text from Star Wars.
Yeah. But regardless, the biggest event that contributed to, Luke as a character was that conscious decision to sever that link and, kill all of those people, basically. And,
right. It's like for the greater good, he made the decision to kill innocents, like the very Spock thing.
Well, and Luke immediately quits the New Republic military after this too. He gives
Thank you
up
for mentioning
the
that,
formal role of warrior. So
in general,
yeah.
No more. He's no longer a general.
I'll talk about something. But our third question: would Luke's experiences in the story make him different than the Luke we meet in The Last Jedi? I almost want to say no.
No, I think this paints the picture of The Last Jedi almost, Mike, better than anything we've read so far.
Yeah, so rejecting the warrior role of the Jedi that they took in the Clone Wars when they were all promoted to general. Everyone's a general. Just rejecting combat and really just involvement in the formal military structure is an important thing. And this part of this legend story kind of feels like it could still, be canon today.
No, definitely. I mean, thousands of people died because of Luke's, maybe not his influence, because they were going to die either way. They're going to be manipulated, but he made the choice. And what's really interesting, Mike, to me about this with the sequel stuff, the Last Jedi stuff, is this is a picture of what Luke's talking about, or what Rey's talking about with Han about Luke. It's like the Luke Skywalker, the Jedi Master, like the Luke Skywalker of Legends. It's like, this is not only something he experienced, but we're also told through this text that there's been holodramas about him that are vastly exaggerated. Like, he killed the Emperor and Palpatine. Like, he killed Palpatine and Vader. Mm-hmm. And that also, like, this is like one of his failings, but it's also been made into a holodrama, right? So like Luke is actually experiencing the failing of this, and he knows the truth. Han, Luke, and Leia and Lando know the truth, and Rogue Squadron, but that's about it. And the rest of the entire world and galaxy thinks, oh, that's where Luke went and did that heroic thing, killed that entire cult of the Empire, and you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, and Luke's like, no, like this was horrible for me, you know? And I didn't even raise my blade to anyone I didn't want to in the story, but I've been told, like in the story, I'm killing stormtroopers and all this, right? So very consistent with the Last Jedi Luke. I actually love it. When I read this, I was actually really shocked.
Yeah. So this is a great Luke story, and even though it's not canon, it could still fit with this overall picture of Luke. It's a bit of a convoluted story because it's a book that's on the long side. So if you were confused about some of the parts we skipped over, like, you know, Lando and Han and Leia and all that, we're trying to keep our focus on Luke, but you should definitely go check out the book to get the full picture of what happened on Mindor.
No, it's a worthwhile read, and it's cool to see all the ties to the movies, the prequels, the EU, and just a book that focuses mainly on Luke, Han, and Leia is just great. It didn't really jump around to other characters other than Chronal at all. A little bit of Lando, and that was it. So that was fun as well. So, great Luke book, Mike. I'm really interested how much Luke stuff there was. I'm really impressed. A lot more than Bakura, and Bakura had a lot.
All right, we got a couple things to talk about from the HoloNet.
This just in to HoloNet News.
So Solo is available on digital now, soon on physical media. And Disney CEO Bob Iger talked to reporters and sort of took some of the blame for the schedule that Star Wars has been releasing at. Called it too much, too fast, and fans can expect a slowdown for the franchise. So he's sort of implying that releasing Solo 5 months after The Last Jedi was a bad idea, but it was him who pushed it, and not to he didn't throw anyone else at Lucasfilm under the bus with that.
I think this is really interesting news, Mike, because it was a level of cannibalization and confusion for people that weren't devout Star Wars fans, I would say. To them, it was just like, wait, what's this? Didn't I just, you know what I mean? Like, because, I mean, you got to think about this too. A lot of the non-devoted Star Wars fans might not even seen The Last Jedi in December. They might have seen him in January or, you know what I mean? Or February or something like that. And then you got Solo trailers popping up, and, you know, it's really interesting. So,
yeah, it definitely
the real question is, what does this mean?
Well, it definitely created a marketing challenge. And I think that the
they held off for so long. They held off for marketing for Solo so long because of that.
Yeah. And the 3 Star Wars films before Solo all did over $1 billion. Force Awakens more than $2 billion. It was setting up some unrealistic expectations for both fans and the company. If we're getting 1 to 2 movies a year, they're not all going to be $1.5 or $2 billion movies. That's just not, reasonable. But Solo ended up with 400 million, maybe just under at the global box office, which is typically pretty good, but it's really low for a Star Wars movie. Plus, with all the reshoots and everything that had to happen, we've talked about that, and you've heard about that at other places. Anyway, so it's nice to hear Bob Iger take some responsibility for what went wrong with Solo, and I like that we are going to slow down a little bit, but he did reaffirm that they're still working on the Rian Johnson trilogy and then the films from the Game of Thrones guys, and they've still got the streaming service with the live action show coming. So there is still Star Wars coming, but maybe this 3 films
Spaced
in
out.
18 months is maybe a little too much. It works for Marvel, but maybe doesn't work for Star Wars.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a little too heavy for Star Wars.
Well,
that's okay.
Yeah, it's a little too heavy for Star Wars, and Star Wars films are just so much more.
This is why it's too heavy for Star Wars. What you're about to say?
Well, I'm going to take it the other side. Marvel films are much safer than Star Wars movies because but for the most part, it's stories that have been told before, sort of a formulaic thing. For the most part, like the first Guardians of the Galaxy, huge risk.
Yes.
Black Panther on some level was, and both those movies crushed it, which is great. Like I love the MCU. I'm not trying to put it down by any means, but people always try to compare these two giant properties that Disney owns, and it's not necessarily, an apples to apples comparison.
Right. No, you're completely right. So I think this is all good. So
Yeah. Well, and we will have more on Solo next week once Jesse finally gets his hands on the Blu-ray and watches it. I've already watched it digital a couple times, but we've got a lot to talk about next week about the film itself.
yep, I'm a physical copy kind of person.
So some other news that maybe wouldn't have been as interesting to us before we started doing this podcast, but there's going to be a new Star Wars comic series coming. It's called Age of Star Wars, and it's a 30-issue run that's going to start in December. We're going to get some more specific info next month at New York Comic Con, but this Age of Star Wars is actually divided up into 3 specific ages: Age of Republic, Age of Rebellion, and Age of Resistance. And those all sound like expansions to the same video game, but it's dividing up, our movie timeline, basically. And
So awesome.
Each issue is going to focus on one hero or villain from the specific era. And they've said that the first issue is Age of Republic, Darth Maul.
I love it.
Yeah.
You know it.
So in that, we might find out how he got stuck on Malachor and Rebels, or perhaps more of his involvement with Kira from Solo. But this is exciting. Assuming they keep all things even, 10 characters from the prequel era, 10 from the original trilogy era, and 10 from the sequel era.
That is awesome. Yeah, 10 characters. So these are really fun one-offs then. You can look at them independently, or you can look at them as a continuous story between all 30, which is great both ways. I love that. I cannot wait, Mike. I cannot wait. I'm a huge Darth Maul fan. What a great start, Darth Maul. And maybe, I wonder if these will be chronologically. So it's like if Darth Maul's early on, will he be further back in the Republic era? And the 9th and 10th one will be further along in the Republic era?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's some of the info we'll get at New York Comic Con.
Can't wait.
So if each issue focuses on a hero or villain, give me 3 heroes or villains. You don't have to keep it to one from each era, but just give me 3 heroes or villains you want to see get a comic.
Okay.
And,
Just 3?
and
That's pretty tough.
Well, and if you want to think about it, I'll give you the ones that I would like to see. You're
not gonna like the ones I'm gonna say, I feel like, but it's okay.
And this is beyond the obvious of we need Will Rowe Hood to have at least 2 of these episodes.
Ignore that. Yeah, move on from that. Has gelato days and has ice cream days.
I would like to see. So Age of Republic, the prequel era is my. It's not that I hate it, but it's just my least favorite. So I'm the least knowledgeable about it. I'm gonna say I'd like to see a comic about Qui-Gon, perhaps before the Phantom Menace, which would be cool.
Definitely.
If we're going original trilogy Galactic Civil War era, I need more Cassian. I definitely am super interested in, the Cassian and K2SO story, or growing up as a separatist or whatever. And if I'm going to go sequel era, I want a Tali Lintra comic. She's the A-Wing pilot that you think is being set up as a character in, like a major character in The Last Jedi, and unfortunately that doesn't come to pass.
Okay, this is hard. 3. So the prequel era, I could name out so many. Just off the top of my head, Master Plo, Kuhn, General Grievous, just to get actually more information on Grievous's story, because I feel like we need that. Or maybe someone like Cad Bane. So I'm choosing 3 factions there. We got, Jedi, Confederacy, and
said 3, not 9.
Scum. Scum. Well, I'm not going to do that with the next 2. The next, original trilogy is kind of hard, honestly. For me personally, it'd be kind of interesting to see something that like Jabba or Bosk or someone like that. One of these side characters that have a lot of love, but we don't know much about them with the new canon.
Yeah.
So what they're doing during that time. I would really like Cassian 2 or K2. And then the sequel trilogy, ideally I would like, for story's sake, someone like young Ben Solo. I don't think it's going to happen because that's going to be in the movies only.
Well,
Probably.
we've got like baby Ben Solo in the Han Solo Last Shot.
No. I want like the Jedi Academy Ben
Gotcha,
Solo.
gotcha,
That's
gotcha.
what I want. So that'd be mine. Jedi Academy Ben Solo before he goes full Kylo Ren, before the Luke incident. So probably that for me.
I'm changing my answer for the sequel era. I hope we get Tally, but if I have to pick one, I want to know what happens to Captain Phasma after The Last Jedi, because I am willing to bet money that she comes back somehow. So I'm going to find out what happens when she falls into that fireball. She has to become a cyborg or whatever. And
she is the new Boba Fett.
Boba Fett.
Like all the way, including Boba Fett with the Sarlacc pit, how he escapes it in Legends.
Or Kenny. Let's throw another reference into today's episode. Yeah. And just the last piece of news, Star Wars Resistance comes out next weekend.
It's releasing. Okay, Mike, so here's something interesting I found about Resistance, and maybe my information's wrong, but it's coming out on a Sunday.
Yep.
Late.
Yeah, Sunday at like 10 p.m. or something like that.
I don't think I'll make that either. But maybe.
It'll be interesting to see if it keeps that same time slot or adjusts to a more kid or family friendly one.
Yeah, I don't think that slot's going to stay that. I don't think it's going to change. But interesting first weekend. We will actually have either a short segment or a full on bonus episode about Resistance in the future. So you guys stay tuned with that. But
just depends
watch
on
it at
how
home.
good it is.
Yeah.
All right, let's move over. We've got some shout outs to do. The first group of people I'm going to send a shout out to today is our Spotify listeners. We've seen a huge uptick here in the past few weeks, so I'm glad that word is getting out on Spotify that you can find us there.
Yeah, it's a really good tool. If you guys don't have a podcast app and you're an avid user of Spotify like I am, I would recommend it. I use a podcast app and Spotify to keep my stuff separate. But if you say you only listen to a couple podcasts, Spotify is great, Mike, because it'll tell you every time we have a new episode. It's like following your favorite artists.
Yeah. Next one is to Sean Miguel Hancock. He sent us a Facebook message, which was a sweet message, but he also... I'm also going to bookmark this one. I might come back and blame you, Sean, because you've made me reinstall Galaxy of Heroes on my phone. He was saying when we were at the Dejarik table, talking about games, he'd like to hear some more Galaxy of Heroes. And I downloaded it when it was brand new, but then got a new phone and never went back to it. But it's on my phone now, and if I start losing hours and hours of time to that game, Sean, I'm coming for you.
I like it. I've never played Mike. I've obviously seen it. I have a good friend who plays way too much of it and has spent a lot of money. At one point, he was in the top 3 in the world with his Darth Maul. I mean, something ridiculous. But I just have a moral opposition to phone games. Well, if I can,
depending on how sucked into the game I get, you might hear some of that in future Dejarik table segments.
No, I would be sucked in. That's my opposition. I know I would.
It's good that you know.
All in. Yeah. Another shout out we got here, Mike, is for a awesome guy we have on Twitter who's talked to us a lot, engages with us a lot.
Rural Farm Boy 1.
That's right, and he sent us a message via email, which I thought was
not like an email message. It was he emailed us a voice recording, and it was awesome. We welcome that if you're nice like he was. You say nice things about the show, and you're not yelling at us. But yeah, he had some thoughts on Solo and stuff we might actually talk about again next week.
Yep. So keep being awesome, man. And continuing with our tradition from previous episodes, guys, I'm going to read a review written by you guys at home about our show. And please keep up the reviews, and we will continue reading them on the show. So if you want to have your written review on Apple Podcasts read on the show, just write us a review. If it's funny, we'll read it. If it's embarrassing, we'll read it. If it's hopefully encouraging, we'll read it. So this is a review from Kara Heck. And the title is Entertaining Podcast. I've never been more excited to learn about Star Wars. Jesse and Mike's humor and knowledge of the Star Wars universe is a very entertaining introduction.
That's right. So we've got at least one person fooled that we know what we're talking about.
Well, I assume they mean an introduction to Mike, which is my goal, is someone who just watches the movies and listens to our show.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's what this person's saying, which is so exciting for me. Thank you, Kara, for the awesome review, and guys, keep the reviews coming. We really appreciate them, and they really drive us to keep working hard and keep reading and keep writing and keep talking. And sometimes I can't even talk. So,
and we're actually I'm going to throw another one on today. This is a review from CW Slate. It says, very easy listen. You guys have a good format and good content, and you're part of a mostly positive fandom, which is key for me to stay interested. Keep up the good work. I'll take credit for the mostly part. If it was just Jesse, it would be positivity all the time. But thanks for that,
right.
CW. So the reason that we read those reviews, we do have our ongoing contest to win some Ian McDiarmid signed Emperor Palpatine art. All you have to do to be eligible to win this, and it's cool looking art. It's all over our social media right now. Just write a review to the show, either on Apple Podcasts or whatever service you use to listen to the show. Send it, and then you send us a screenshot of your review, just so we can keep track of who wrote what and how we can get in contact with you to, let the winners know. Let the winner know, I guess, that they've won. So Kara and CW, hope you're listening and heard your review around the show. Send us an email so that we can let you know if you are the winner. We're going to choose the winners on October 11th. So we're going to run this through October 11th, and we'll announce it on October 18th. So Kara and CW are entered. There's already a few other entries. It's real easy. Just take a few minutes, write a review, potentially win some cool art.
Just keep sending those reviews, guys, and we are noticing all of you guys, and that art will be hopefully sent your way. So Mike?
Yeah, mainly I need you to send me a screenshot of your review so I can get in contact with you and know that it's not Jesse writing a fake review just trying to win this Palpatine art from me.
Oh, no. It's beautiful to me.
All right, and that'll do it for our episode this week. Thanks for joining us in the Canon Cantina. You can connect with us on Facebook. We've got Twitter at The Canon Cantina. We've got an Instagram at Canon Cantina. And like we've already mentioned, we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, Podcast Addict, YouTube, and we're also on Spotify, thanks to all of those people.
So once again, guys, help spread the word of our new show. Subscribe, rate, and review. That's the best thing you can do. If you share our show or review our show or both, that's the best thing you can do for us. And if you think we can do something better, send us an email at canoncantina@gmail.com. Join us next week, guys, as we continue to dive into Legends immediately after this book. So we're going to go Bakura, Mindor, and now The Courtship of Princess Leia. All these books are back-to-back, Luke Skywalker. If you want to read along at home, pick up The Courtship of Princess Leia.
And if you want to read for me and send me some notes, that'd be great. Thanks. We hope you had a great time here in the Canon Cantina. Cheers, everyone.
May the Force be with you.
Boring conversation anyway.